Welcome back to Knowledge is King, guys. I am Kings, and today we are going to be looking at replacing this computer table with a floating computer table. And it's actually be considerably bigger too, wider and deeper, because there's no room for writing on paper or anything once the computer's on here. So the first part we're going to do is start building the tabletop, and that's going to consist of a top and a bottom with banding connecting the whole thing. So it's going to look like one solid piece, and then we're going to mount it to the wall so that it looks like it's floating. Let's get started. Alright guys, so I already got started on the project here, and the first thing I did was I took a 4x4 sheet of 3/4 inch plywood and ripped two pieces down to 21 inches. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to line up their edge and screw them together, and that way I can cross cut them to length. And I'm going to cut off one side to make sure that side's square, then pull my measurement from there, cut the next side. So we'll do that now. Alright, I got these two screwed together, and the first thing I'm going to do is cut off one side. All I'm going to do is put a straight edge on one side, clamp it down, and run my circular saw down the straight edge. Okay, so now that I got that first side cut, I'm just going to pull over from the side I now know is square, mark 41 inches, and that's where I'm going to cut it off. Okay, so I have the board flipped around here, and I just want to show you how I'm going to run my saw along this straight edge. Since my blade here is offset by 1.5 inches, my mark was at 41, I need to actually come back to 39.5. So I need to fall back 1.5 inches. So then I'll pull from both sides, which I've already done, and marked 39.5. Okay, and that is where my straight edge is going to go, so that when I run my saw along the side of it, it'll cut it off at 41. Alright, so I got both of those cut to length. They're actually at 40.5 because my clamp wasn't down tight enough and my straight edge moved on me. So another tip there, just make sure your clamp doesn't move. But now we're looking at the pipes that are going to hold up the table, and if we slide it on here, we see that there's a lip here, so it's not going to sit flat on this bar. So what we're going to have to do is come in and take out a notch 2 inches deep, so that'll cover from here to the wall, and we're going to notch this whole thing out 2 inches at 1/4 inch deep, and we'll do that at the table saw. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is raise the blade up to 2 inches, and then I'm going to slide this over, and I'm actually just going to go 3/8 of an inch just to be safe, and that's measured to this side of the blade. Okay, then I'm going to lower the blade till the top of the blade is just a little bit lower than the top of our groove there. Then I'm going to measure 2 inches to the left side of the blade. Okay, so now that we have that groove cut, if we put this pipe on here, we can see that it sits flat across here and it goes all the way in. Now we went a little farther than we needed to, but that's going to only help us just in case we need to put something behind the bar against the wall, because the wall is going to be here and the pipe will be sitting just like that. So we gave ourselves just a little wiggle room. Our next step is going to be to find out how thick the whole entire table is going to be when you put it all together. Okay, so I've sandwiched the pipes between the top and what will be the bottom so that we can find out a thickness for our banding that's going to go around the whole table. And it looks like it's going to be 2 3/8. So we're going to need to rip down some 1x at 2 3/8 to go around the whole perimeter of the table. Alright, so I got enough 1x ripped down at the table saw to go around the two sides in the front. Now all we got to do is cut them to length. And we're going to need two that are 21 inches long, and then the one that's going to go on the front. So I have 40.5 inches here, but I need to cover up the two side ones, and they're each 3/4. So I'm going to have to add 1.5 inches. So I'm going to have to go to 42 inches. So that's going to be 2 at 21 and 1 at 42, and we'll cut those at the miter saw now. Alright, so we got these cut to length. Our next step is going to be to attach them to the top and bottom of our table. And we're going to attach them with screws, but what we're going to do is we're going to take the bit I have in here and we're going to counterbore down, and once the screw is in, we're going to glue in these little plugs, these little wooden plugs, and I'll show you how to make those in just a minute. We'll glue those in there, let it set up, cut it off, and sand it smooth. So you don't need to be able to tell that the screw is there. Alright, so let's jump on to the benchtop drill press and we'll get all our holes drilled for all of our banding for the top and bottom. Alright, so I have a mark here and I came in 3/8 of an inch. That's half of the thickness of our top, which is 3/4. So I'm just going to line the bit up with that mark, and so I moved my fence up to that mark. And now what I'm going to do is probably just drill 3 holes in the side pieces and probably 5 holes in the front piece. Alright then, to make the plugs, I have a plug cutting bit mounted in the drill press here. And all you got to do is just drill a bunch in a piece of wood, making sure not to drill all the way through. Alright, so we have all our plugs. Now we're just going to cut them out of our board using the table saw. So we have all the plugs that we're going to need cut, but we're not ready to use them yet. We're not even quite ready to put the banding on yet, because what I want to do first is put some supports that'll end up in between the top and the bottom. Because what we're going to have, once we slide these over these pipes, we're going to have kind of a long span here for this wood. And so what I want to do is I'm going to take some of the scrap wood that I cut off of the original plywood and cut some strips that run from pipe to pipe that'll go in between. That'll give it a little more support from sagging when it's sitting up there on the wall. So I'm just going to rip these down at the table saw to the same height as these. And these things, although they're 1/2 inch pipe, the outside diameter is 7/8 of an inch. So we're going to rip these down at 7/8 of an inch and put probably 3 of them across the center portion of this. Okay, so I got these boards ripped down on the table saw, and I've already made a center mark on all of them. And basically what I'm going to do is center them left and right, and then I'm going to put one at 5 inches, one at 10 inches, and one at 15 inches. And then I'm going to glue and screw these down. Alright, so one thing I wanted to point out here is this bit is too long for me to drill in to here and get it countersunk with the screw without going all the way through. So what I do there is I'll grab this countersinking bit, and it doesn't have a bit coming out of it. All it does is countersink your hole. It just tapers your hole a little. That way I don't have to worry about going all the way through my wood. Alright, those are in, so now we're ready to attach the bottom to the top and then put our banding all the way around. Alright, so I have the bottom piece on here, and what I want to do first is screw the bandings to the side and front onto the bottom. That'll help me get it lined up with the top piece. Alright, so I'm just putting this side piece flush with the front and then flush with the bottom. I'm going to take my drill and drill into the bottom piece. Now I'm just going to screw that in. Now that we have the banding screwed onto the sides and the front on just the bottom piece, what I want to do now is put some glue on these support rails, then put this back down, make sure that this is hitting the front of the banding, and it's already tight in the side, so I know it'll be hitting there, and then screw it down to these support rails. Alright, so I got the whole thing put together now. I got the bottom screwed to the top into those cross braces that we had. I got the banding all screwed on. I glued in the wood plugs, and I got those cut off flush with a multi-tool. Now the next thing we got to do, we got to notch out the bottom so that when this piece, this is what's going to be screwed to the wall. So this, since this is the bottom, this is actually going to be up like this, and the bar will go in. We need to cut this area out here so that this can slide in around this. And I already got this laid out. Now I'm just going to cut it with the jigsaw. Alright, so I want to give you a little bit of a pro tip when using the jigsaw.
King's Pro Tips!
When you're cutting into a finished product and you don't want it to chip out like this, so the first cut I did, it chipped out a lot. The second cut I did, it actually has very little chip out, just tiny little pieces that'll be easier to smooth down with a sander. Whereas this one actually took a chunk out. And the reason for that is before I started cutting, the first cut was made on the 3. So this was down here, like that. And what that does is, if I'm holding this still, what the saw blade is doing is going like this. Okay, and it's really getting in there, so that'll allow me to cut really fast, but it's going to tear up my wood. Now you have different progressions here. This one has 0, 1, 2, and 3. For the last one I did there, I moved this to the 0. Now all the blade does is go up and down like this. Okay, the cut is going to be a lot slower, but you're going to have way less chip out like that. Way more manageable. Now this is not going to be that big of a deal on this project because this is actually going to get covered up. But if you were cutting this or something that you're going to have to sand later, you're going to want to set it to the 0 or the 1, depending on what model you have, so that it doesn't do that. And that setting on your jigsaw is actually called orbital. It's the same thing that on some sawzalls have that same thing. So it basically rocks the bit. So if you want to do fast cutting, you set the orbital all the way up. If you want to do smooth cutting with little chip out, then you set it down to 0. And then they have some in between, which I've never used. I don't know why I would ever want a little bit of chipping, but not too much, where I could have none. I guess it's maybe a speed thing. You want to go as fast as you can without as much chip out. I don't know, just stick with 0 and 3. Don't ever use those middle ones. Unless someone tells me there's a really good reason for the middle settings. I have no idea. Either you want chip out or you don't. You're going to have speed with the chip out and slowness with the no chip out. So it's a give and take. Alright, then when you're cutting, so I wanted to get this straight line here with the jigsaw. So what I came from one corner and turned it until I was in a straight line here. Now before I cut this all the way through and let this piece drop out, I actually want to finish cutting this direction, because keeping this piece in here will help keep my blades tight against this side of the wood. Otherwise what's going to happen is this piece will be out and my blade will want to kick up off to the side, and then I'll be off my line. So by keeping this piece in and running my blade along this other edge pinched in between here, it allows me for a straighter cut coming back. Alright, those are cut out. Now all that's left to do is give this thing a good sanding over the whole thing. Up to 150 I'm probably going to do for this, since it's going to be painted. And then obviously after the sanding, I'm going to paint it. Then we'll be ready to start working on mounting this to the wall. Alright, so I do have it all sanded up, but before I start painting it, I'm actually going to take my router, and I've got a round over bit chucked in here, and I'm going to ease over all the corners on the sides and the front. I don't want to ease anything over on the back because that's going to abut the wall, and that might look kind of weird. So we're going to leave that square, but the rest of all the corners on the top and the bottom we're going to round over with the router. So I removed that old computer table that was sitting here so we can work on the wall behind it. And the first thing we got to do is mount these little boards here, because how this is going to work, this will get screwed to the wall, and then our first piece of our pipe will get screwed to that with the elbow connected to it. And that's going to sit just like this. And then we're going to take and mount that to the wood. So it's going to sit just like that. So the first thing we need to do is get this wood piece mounted. Now to mount this, we're going to need to find a stud. And we have an outlet here, so whenever you have an outlet, unless the house has been remodeled, which this one has not been, there's a stud on either side, because the outlet has to get mounted to something. So we just got to tap the wall. And this, you can hear the difference between this is hollow, this is real solid, so I know the stud is on this side. So the center of a stud coming from an outlet is about 1/4 inch away from the side of the cover. So that is where a stud is. Now we just need to come 16 inches from the center of that stud both ways, and that will give us the center of the two studs that we're going to be mounting to. So that mark is here and here is going to give us the center of the studs that we're going to be attaching to. Now we just have to find the right height. And I want the finish of the top to be at 32 inches. As this sits in here, to here is the inside of the bottom of the top. Then I have an extra 3/4. So from here to what will be the top of the table is 2 1/4. So what I need to do is find 32 and then come down 2 1/4 inches. Okay, so I have my mark here. I have one for the center, one for the top of this board. And then all I'm going to do is line up the top, the center, and screw. I'll put one screw in here to get it started, then level this out and get another screw in there with a 2 1/2 inch construction screw. So if your screw sucks in tight to the wood, then you know you hit a stud. If it just starts spinning and doesn't go in, then you miss the stud, you're only hitting drywall. Now I just have to do the same thing to the other side, but instead of measuring up off the floor, what I want to do is set my level on top of here and make sure the tops of these are level going across. So I leveled that across and made a mark on top. And now, instead of finding exactly the center of this, or using this mark, that's the center of the stud, what I want to do is I want to make sure that this is perfectly 32 inches on center from that board. So what I want to do is just make a mark at 32. If from that right side to this right side is 32, then its center to this center is going to be 32, and that's where I want to put it. Now we just got to screw our pipes into the elbows here and attach them to the boards. And these I'm just installing with some inch-long number 10 screws. And when I pre-drill the hole, I'm actually angling a little bit. It's not going to be enough to hit the stud behind it. It's only going to be in this wood, but by angling it, I get as much grab as I can in that wood for these shorter screws. And the reason I'm going to put two closer to the top is because that's where all the weight is really going to be bearing. So when this is in here like this, and our table is going to go across it, when it presses down, it's going to want to pull away from here. It's going to want to press in there. So this one's merely here just to keep it centered, but these two are going to be doing the brunt of the holding. All right, so now we have both these on the wall. The next step is to be sliding our tabletop on these. Now I have one coat of paint on there. It's going to need a few more, but we'll put it on here anyway just to keep the video going. So let's get that on there and see how it looks. Alright, so that's the top in right there. I just have it slid over those pipes. And what I want to do is come beneath and screw it to the pipes so that it can't accidentally slide off. And we'll put the screws from the bottom. That way you don't see it from the top. Alright, so I'm gonna measure from the edge of the board. And I've got about 5 inches to the center. So I'm going to come out 16 inches and make another mark on that 16 inches at 5 inches. That's where I'm going to drill my first hole. Inch-long self-tapping screws. Alright, so I got the top screw down so it's not going to move. Then I went ahead and made 2 of these, and it's just a couple of 1-bys in a U shape that it's going to cover up our pipe right there. So it's going to look like this, and I already have some screws pre-drilled in this one to throw it on there. Another thing I did was I loosened up these screws here and put a shim behind there that would tip this. And the reason I did that was because once I put this on, there was already a little bit of dip to it. So the front was a little bit lower than the back. So I just shimmed up those bars and then screwed them back down, and now the top is level again. So now that that's done, I'm going to put the last post on there, and this project is going to be finished. Alright guys, and you can see, now that we got the computer up there, there's still plenty of room, way more than there was on that old computer table. Now you have room to write papers if you need to. Well, that's it for this week. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week for another woodworking project. Oh, I like that!